Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to the first of two sessions on a very important subject, which is of increasing importance to sport policies, and which are mega events. My name is Koen Breedveld. I'm with the Plenary Institute in the Netherlands, and I've been asked to chair this session. And it seems to me that when you talk about mega events, people either love mega events or they hate them. And people that love mega events could be a politician, could be a construction builder, could be a sports marketing company. They would love marketing events. Could be a CEO of a sports federation organization. They would love mega events. They would say it brings in money, expenditures, employment, tourists, a way to position your city or your government in the world. It would raise pride, cohesion, and it would make people enthusiastic about sports and even make them do sports. The people that would hate mega events could be a researcher, a journalist, a citizen, an amateur sportsman, would say, that's a lot of bogus. You don't get money in. You're driving tourists out. Not everybody likes sports. What you're mainly doing is that you make people watch sports, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they do sports. Okay? And that is a fierce debate. And I've witnessed that debate quite closely in the Netherlands on two occasions. Following the successful Sydney Games in 2000 and the successful Athens Games for the Netherlands in 2004, we had this big plan, beautiful plan, to get the Olympic Games of 2028 towards the Netherlands and to build a large public support for hosting those events in 2028, a century later than we had the event in 1928 in Amsterdam. And it was a nice plan. Right up until the point that the policymakers thought it would be necessary to do like a cost-benefit estimation. How much is it going to cost and how much is going to give us revenues? And of course that seemed like a sensible idea. And we ended up with a cost-benefit analysis that said, it's clear that this is going to cost us millions of dollars, billions of dollars. And we've got no clue what the revenues are going to be. So if you've got such a report, at the background of a recession, you know that the politicians would be eager to drop this beautiful plan. That was 2011. The other case study from the Netherlands are the European Games. You know, the Netherlands hosted the European Youth Olympic Festival in 2013 in Utrecht, my hometown. And that was such a nice occasion for the Dutch federations to have a nice talk with the head of the EOC, Mr. Hickey, excuse me if I pronounce his name incorrectly, but we had a nice chat with him. The federations had a nice chat with him. And over coffee, and I'm guessing beer, they made this deal, fully non-transparent, that yes, the Dutch may host the European Games of 2019. So there was a deal between the EOC and the Dutch sport federations, up to the point that the politics asked questions. Is this really a high elite sporting event? Will we make anything out of it? What will be the benefits for Dutch society? And up to the point where, unfortunately, we had to go back to the EOC, and after having accepted the offer to host the European Olympic Games, the European Games in 2019, regrettably had to announce that we were withdrawing our offer and saying, we're sorry, we couldn't back it up with the politicians, we will not host the European Games in 2019. So far, I think a sensible decision. Anyway, it is just to show that in the Netherlands, as well as I think as in many other countries, there are fierce debates about the significance of mega events and what it will bring the sporting society and society in general. So therefore, I thank Play the Game for hosting two plenary sessions on this subject, and we've got 4 enlightened speakers who will guide us through this first session. And I will now introduce the first speaker, who is Mr. Zimbalist. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Sounds good.
Sounds good? Okay. He's got a beautiful book out, which is called Circus Maximus. You can more or less guess where he's heading with the title. That came out in January 2015. And I've been told he's personally responsible for the fact that Boston is not bidding for the 2024 Olympic Games. He's got two main questions in his book. How the hell did we get there with mega events? And this is really worth it. Mr. Zimbalist, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Koen. It's really a great pleasure to be at this conference. It's the first Play the Game conference I've been at. And I want to just acknowledge how in awe I am and to thank Jens and Maria for putting together such a wonderful conference with, as far as I can tell, no organizational hitches and taking care of all 400 of us for several days. So thank you to Jens, Maria, and the entire staff. I think that Koen in his introduction left out one category of people which I would put myself in, and that's somebody who loves mega events but just doesn't like the economics of mega events. So what, and Koen alluded to this, what we hear regularly is that hosting a mega event is going to be the cat's meow for a local economy. For London 2012, they hired a consulting firm, Grant Thornton, that did a study that found that the positive economic impact from the games would be somewhere between $16 and $40 billion. For the Rio World Cup in 2014 and the Olympics that probably will happen this coming summer, they hired Ernst & Young, and they found that the impact would be plus $100 billion on the economy. Way back in 1976, the mayor of Montreal, Jean Drapeau, said that the Olympics can no more have a deficit than a man can have a baby. They ended up going 9 times over their initial projections. So that's what we often hear in the media with regard to mega events. The scholarly, the refereed, published scholarly work on the economic impact of the Olympics and the World Cup is not nearly so sanguine, not nearly so encouraging. I surveyed the literature and I found 16 cases where no economic impact was identified. In 7 cases, there was a small, short-run positive effect on employment. And in 3 cases, it was found, these are all econometric studies, that there was a negative effect from hosting mega events. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking to you about what I think the underlying structure and dynamic is that creates these not very positive economic outcomes. We have, in both cases, an international monopoly, FIFA and the IOC, and basically they go out to the world and they say bid against each other, and we'll pick the bid that we like the best. So I think that there, in terms of stylizing this as a model in economics, and I try to be very simple about this, but I think there are 2 or 3 different ways that we can envision the dynamics of this process. The first is assume, as will be the case for 2024, assume that you have 5 bidders and that they each have perfect information about the economic costs and benefits. They know exactly how much it will cost them to put on the games, and they know exactly what the benefit will be. And then they enter into a process of competition with each other. How high will they go when they bid? Well, in competition, they each take a step further than the other guy takes, or the other city or the other country takes, and they go higher and higher until they come up to the point where the costs equal the revenues. And if they're rational, they won't bid beyond that point. They'll bid up to the point where the revenues and the costs offset each other, so there's no net benefit at the end of the day. That's assuming perfect information, and something else that I'll talk about in a moment, which is that there's no principal-agent problem. A second possibility is that they don't have perfect information and there's no principal-agent problem. In other words, they don't know how much benefit there will ultimately be. And in a situation like that with five cities or 5 countries bidding against each other, it's very likely that one of those bidders will misapprehend or misestimate what the benefit is going to be, and they'll overshoot. And it'll be the bidder that overshoots the most who presents the bid that's most attractive to FIFA or the IOC, and they'll get the bid, and the net result will be that there will be a net loss from hosting the games. Are we okay? The third possibility is that you still have imperfect information, but you do have a principal-agent problem. And what do I mean by principal-agent problem? The principal is either the city or the country that's going to host the games. The agent is the organizing committee that's in charge of doing the bids, or at least pushing the bids forward. Very often it's the case that the agent is representing interest from the construction industry, interest from architectural firms, interest from banks that are going to float the loans, interest from lawyers who are working for all of those groups, and a few others. They're pushing the bid committee, they're pushing the organizing committee, and they're bidding with respect to their own private appreciation of what their benefits will be, not what the overall macro benefits will be to the city or the country. And that, of course, leads to still higher bids. It's this last situation where there's a principal-agent problem and there's imperfect information that I think best represents reality. I want to talk about the short run and then the long run from hosting these events. Typically, the cost of bidding alone, going through the several-year process where you're competing against other countries and other cities, amounts to a cost of somewhere between $75 and $100 million. So there are a lot of prospective hosts that spend that much money and never get to host the games. There's also generally the claim that hosting the games creates a lot of construction jobs leading up to the games. And that can be quite accurate. The problem there is this, that the business cycle that a country goes through is not synchronized with the bidding process. So when you're doing extra construction for the games, your economy can be very close to full employment, or your construction industry can be very close to full employment. And if on top of that full employment you have to build 32 venues, or renovate and build 32 venues, or you have to build 8 or 12 stadiums, what you do is you create excess demand given the capacity in that sector, and it pushes construction prices up. So you get inflation. You might also get some additional employment, but what often happens is that the employment is imported from other countries or other remote regions in your own country so that you can pay, the construction firms can pay lower wages. Now, it's often expected that there'll be a tourism boost. If you're hosting the Summer Olympics, you get 10,500 athletes, you get the coaches and the trainers, altogether it's 16 or 17,000 people. You get their families, you get tourism, you get Olympic fans who are coming. So you get tens of thousands of people who are coming expressly for the games. That sounds like a boost in tourism. The problem is that it crowds out normal tourism. Sometimes it more than crowds out normal tourism. The actual net tourism went down in London by 6%. The actual net tourism in China went down by over 20% in 2008. There are some countries that have very small gain. The overall effect is that it's neutral at best. That's in the short run. In the long run, what you lose when you have an Olympic tourist or a World Cup tourist instead of a normal tourist is you lose the benefit of word of mouth. The European Tour Operators Association, which of course works in the tourism industry, make the claim after studying several Olympics that the best way to promote tourism in your city or your country is by word of mouth. So if you end up during the 3 months or the 3 weeks or the 5 weeks of the Olympics or the World Cup, if you end up having sports tourism replace normal tourism, the sports tourists go back to their friends and neighbors and relatives at the end of their stay and they say, I saw a terrific football match, or I saw a terrific 100-meter dash, or whatever it was. That's something that their friends, neighbors, and relatives can't go to the country or the city and see. But if you have a normal tourist and they go and they say, well, I went to the Tate Gallery, and I saw the London Theatre, and I saw the London Symphony, or I had great meals at these restaurants, that's something that will attract people back to the city. So not only do you get a neutralizing effect in the short run, but in the long run, you can end up having a negative effect on your tourist industry. Another very important phenomenon that is ubiquitous in hosting Olympics and World Cups is cost overruns. A study 2 years ago out of Oxford University in England found that every single Olympic Games for which they had accurate information since 1960 has had a cost overrun, and that since 1976 the average cost overrun has been 252%, 3.52 times the initial bid was the final price. Why do you have cost overruns with the Olympics? Why are they universal? There are a couple of reasons for them. One is that when the bid is initially made, There's an effort to lowball the expense. There's an effort to present a bare bones plan so that the politicians will sign on and say, yes, we want to do this. Once that plan is approved, then there's a motivation to expand the scope of the plan and hence beat out your fellow competitors. So the expansion of the scope is one thing, yet as you're putting the bells and the whistles into the stadiums. That's one thing that drives costs. Another thing that drives costs is that unlike practically any other construction project that goes on, when you host the World Cup or you host the Olympics, there's no flexibility in the timing. The country that hosts the Olympics in 2024, on July 20th, 2024, has to have all of the facilities. They can't say, oh, we had bad weather and so it's going to be delayed for a month or two. And when you have that kind of a deadline, the construction companies that sign on to the contract that say you only get paid if you're done at a certain date, they have to prioritize that project, move materials, move labor resources towards getting that project done, all of which means much higher prices on the construction end. I think I'm taking too much time, so I'm going to jump over some stuff. I'm okay? So London initially bid $5 billion, and they ended up spending somewhere between $15 and $20 billion. It depends on various accounting things and what exchange rate that you use. But if you compare that to the amount of revenue that was generated during the games, you see it was somewhere between $3.5 billion and $4.5 billion. So there's obviously, in the short run, there's an appreciable deficit there. And therefore, the only way that, from an economic perspective, this could be justified is if there were long-term benefits. So let's consider what happens in the long run. Now, this obviously is going to vary a great deal from sport to sport and from country to country. But recent experience we have in Brazil and South Africa is not very heartening. In Brazil, I think you probably have heard a lot about all of these white elephants, these stadiums that get built that don't get used at all, or they get used in a very minimal way. So you have in the city of Manaus in the north and along the Amazon River, they have a second-tier soccer team. They don't have a Premier League soccer team in Brazil, but they have a second-tier soccer team that draws somewhere between, or historically drew somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 attendees or fans per game, and they paid $2 or $3 a ticket. For the World Cup, where they played 3 or 4 games in the new Manaus Stadium, they built a stadium that cost approximately $300 million, that has a capacity of 42,400 people, 42,400 seats. And that stadium now sits in Manaus, and they have a second-tier soccer team that draws 1,000 or a little bit more than 1,000 people. That's what we call a white elephant. In Brasilia, they built a stadium with 70,000 capacity that cost something like $600 or $650 million, and they're using it as a parking lot for buses right now because in Brasilia, even though it's the country's capital, they have a third-tier soccer team. One often hears the claim that in hosting the Olympics creates more trade and more foreign investment for a city, for a country. There's no econometric evidence that we have from scholarly studies that says that that's true. I'll be happy to elaborate on some of this stuff later on. So there's some very significant other pieces of bad news that can come along with hosting. One of them, of course, is that it incurs significant debt. I talked about generating employment possibly before the games, but in order to do that, you have to float bonds. You float bonds, you raise billions of dollars, you use that money to build something before the games happen. After the games, you have to pay the debt back over 10, 20, 30 years. Paying it back means that there are less public resources to do other public works, and hence it means less employment. So in the best of circumstances, you have a boost of employment in the short run leading up to the games, offset by a decrease in employment afterwards. There's a question of the opportunity cost of the land that's used. In Boston that Koen referred to earlier, we have a very congested city. We have very little free land. In order to build the Olympic Stadium, they're going to have to build a deck over a railroad yard that would have cost several $100 million. Land is valuable. In New York, when they were going to host the games in 2012, they were going to build a deck over the Long Island Railroad yards between 31st and 33rd Street and 10th and 11th Avenue. Now, that deck was going to cost $400 million, and then they were going to put an Olympic Stadium over that. And to avoid a white elephant, they had a deal with the New York Jets football team that they were going to play their football games there, 8 games a year. This land that they were going to put the football stadium and the Olympic Stadium on in the middle of Manhattan is next to Broadway. It's on a hill. It overlooks the Hudson River, overlooks the Pacific Palisades in New Jersey, probably one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the whole world. And they were going to have 8 games a year. So land is an important issue that, and the use of that land has opportunity costs, and that's often overlooked. So there are many other things here that are listed. I don't really think I have time to talk about them. Let me jump to the last point about long-run effects, and that is that there are many indirect costs other than the opportunity cost of land that often get overlooked. The Olympics, for instance, has a manual on brand protection. And on page 101 of that manual, it says that the city has to clear all advertising space, all signage and all billboards in the city during the 3 weeks leading up to the Olympics, during the 3 weeks of the Olympics, and 2 weeks after the Olympics. So you have a period of over 2 months when all of the billboards have to be cleared out. That means that because they're going to be made available to the Olympic sponsors and the use of the Olympic brands and logos. What that means is that the city can't get income from the advertising in the airports, the advertising in the train stations, the advertising on the buses, and it means that the privately owned billboards have to be wiped clean, and they're going to have to be reimbursed. On top of all of that, there's of course the labor involved in removing and putting back the signage. You also generally make a deal with the World Cup, with FIFA or with the IOC about various tax exemptions. So one of the things that frequently appears is a tax exemption for building materials. So even though you have a lot of building that's going on, the building that you're doing is replacing normal building. When you have normal building, you have taxes on the materials. When you have Olympic and World Cup building, very often you have no taxes. So there are a variety of indirect expenses as well. I think, to be fair, there is good news. Potentially there's good news. Most cities that host have a sense of community. Koen referred to this, a greater sense of cohesion and community and volunteerism and pride. That generally happens. It's a feel-good effect. It doesn't last very long. It can last during the month or two around the games. It might trickle off and be around for a period after that, but it's an ephemeral effect. It's a good effect. It's a positive from hosting the games. There's also the argument that's often made, is being used in Hamburg now in an interesting way, that hosting the Olympics and the World Cup and putting yourself on the world stage and having this mega event in your community is something that enables you to get over political hurdles. It lets you get over the gridlock that affects your political system. Whether it's two parties that are clashing with each other or industrial groups that are clashing with each other, hosting the Olympics brings people together, and so you can start passing legislation and appropriating money for public works that otherwise you couldn't appropriate. And you know what? That is true. Oh, it can be true. But I think that it's a pretty crazy way to run a government, which is to say that let's host this game so we can make our legislature work. Let's host the games so we can make our democratic planning process work. You're probably appropriating the money for the wrong things anyway. But by golly, we need to find a way of making democracy work without hosting the Olympics and the World Cup. I do want to say, I'm just going to mention it without really talking about it because I don't have the time, but I do want to say that as I look at the games, I identify two successful Olympics in the past. One of them was in Los Angeles. It was a very, very special circumstance because it was the only city that was bidding, and it made certain demands on the IOC. The IOC had to accept them. The other is Barcelona. I think there are very special circumstances they'll be happy to talk about. But one of the things that's true about the Barcelonan success, in my view, is a success on a macro level for the city. It was not a success in terms of distribution because, as is the case almost always for mega events, they redistribute income towards higher income groups away from lower income groups, and they create housing problems. What can be done? I don't think there's much that can be done. The IOC, in order to rescue its business model, has introduced Agenda 2020. I think it's fundamentally palliative. The IOC has, I think, in incremental ways, changed its behavior a little bit in Tokyo, changed its behavior a little bit in terms of the countries or cities that are bidding for 2024. But these were reactions that the IOC had to the fact that they only had two bidders at the end of the day for the 2022 Olympics, and that wasn't the only problem. The problem has been since the year 2000, there's been a decrease in the applicant cities, and the candidate cities. It was a long time coming, and Thomas Bach reacted to that. But they reacted to it with Agenda 2020 that talked about affordability and the use of 2 minutes? And the use of temporary venues. That's something that's been part of the Olympic policy, the IOC policy, since 2002. They talked about it in terms of sustainability, but that's something that's been a mantra in the IOC since the 1990s. So I'm not sure how much fundamentally there is new about Agenda 2020, and there'll be a panel tonight after dinner. You can hear more about it then. On an international level, I don't think there's very much that can be done. What you have here is international monopolies that are don't lend themselves naturally to something like the Antitrust Division of the U.S. Justice Department or the Federal Trade Commission or even the European Court of Justice, because it's an international organization that spreads its wings beyond the geographical boundaries of one country. What can be done on a domestic level? I think the most sensible thing that can be done is to avoid bidding altogether. But if you're going to bid, the trick is, if it's possible, is to make the Olympics and the World Cup work for you rather than you as the city working for the Olympics and the World Cup. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zimbalist, for a very good presentation, an excellent framework for us to discuss further. Are there any brief, informative questions that people would like to ask Mr. Zimbalist? Brief, informative questions, one or two.
I convinced them all.
Apparently. If not, then we're going to continue at the debate. Okay. Can I now ask the second speaker to come to the fore? And that'll be Mrs. Sarah Lewis. She is currently the Secretary General of the Fédération Internationale du Ski. She has served the ski sport and participated in the ski sport in many different ways and in many different roles. I believe in 1988 as participant in the Olympic Games. Am I correct? Right. And she's now currently one of the representatives of the IOC in developing the 2020 agenda. Okay, up to you.
Few centimeters difference between us here. I just need to put down the mic. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a pleasure to talk before such a well-informed audience and to give you an insight into actually the effect of Olympic Agenda 2020 on future major sports events. We've heard from both Andrew and from Koen some information and their perspective really on what Agenda 2020 has done or potentially not done, and the reasons for doing it potentially being symbolic. But frankly, having lived through the process, it's been a very different position that the IOC has taken in the past, because they very much opened the whole process for anybody to give their opinion about where they felt different aspects of the Olympic movement should be going. And this particular presentation, this short presentation, will just focus on the major events part. But in total, of all of the different areas, and there were, let's say, 40 different main areas that were presented, hence why it's called, for one reason, 20 plus 20. There were more than 40,000 different comments submitted from all sorts of different organisations, but also many individuals who wanted a chance to have their voice heard. And the group that I was participating in, the working group, was concerned with sustainability and legacy for major events and the Olympic movement as a whole. And we had a booklet like this. The comments weren't filtered, and they weren't already pre-decided what should be debated and discussed, but it was a very open process in order that all the opinions could be discussed. There are many aspects really that have come out of the debates that have taken place over more than a year that are sound practice in terms of organising future major events. And they've also not only had an effect on the Olympic Games, the Olympic Winter Games candidacies, but they've stimulated the international federations, and I represent the largest of the winter sports federations, and some major sport events organisers with their own procedures. You know, for a period of time, you can keep adding fixes to your software and patches and updates, but at some stage you say, no, now it's time actually that we need to redesign the program, and we need to make sure that it is fit for purpose of how society is now. And that really is, I think, in a nutshell, what Olympic Agenda 2020 has tried to address. So some key points. There's already been a lot of publicity about the effects of Olympic Agenda 2020 on the Olympic Games, because the candidacies for the 2024 Games have recently concluded, and there's already been a tangible result to note, which is that there have been bids from 5 very strong cities for the 2024 Games, and that's a higher number than for previous editions. Certainly there were only 2 candidates for the last Winter Games that were elected recently. The key aspects as concerns the organisation of major events include a sustainable approach, legacy with the events and activities, and ensuring efficiencies actually in the organisation and the use of best practices. And perhaps as Andrew alluded to, these things have been part of the IOC mantra in the past, but really effectively making sure that they're on the agenda and they are absolutely a fundamental part of the process of the organisation of the event itself. That hasn't necessarily been the main priority, but it certainly is now. So the vision for the sustainable approach of the agenda is to make use of existing venues instead of really insisting on a compact games, in order to avoid building white elephants and prevent an explosion of costs on facilities. And the IOC have introduced a advisory stage within the pre-candidacy process. So it means that the experts from within the movement, from within the IOC administration, they are actually consulting and supporting potential candidates on the way to construct their bid, in order that they're not presenting perhaps a bid to win the election, but to bid with a sustainable project, with a project that really takes into account a legacy for everything that's going to happen in regard to the Games. So we're not just talking here about Games for 3 weeks, but we are talking about Games and facilities and organisation that will have a long-term positive effect. Both the elected summer, and I can really speak on behalf of the Winter Games, elected cities tend to have a pretty big influence on other major sporting events. As the organisers and the national authorities look to have a sporting legacy as part of their strategy, one of the ways to accomplish this is, of course, by bidding for other major sports events. At the moment, we've got taking place, and I can refer to my home country, Great Britain, the Rugby World Cup, which has been taking place all over the country, and the finals, of course, will be in London, at Twickenham, at the home of rugby, at least from an English perspective. And it's been very successful, especially if you come from the Southern Hemisphere, a little less so if you come from near to where I come from, which is London, England. The Athletics World Championships will take place in London in 2017. That's one of the biggest sports events outside the Summer Games. And presently, the World Gymnastics Championships, with a record number of participants, are taking place in Glasgow, that recently hosted very successful Commonwealth Games. So utilising existing infrastructure and making the most of these stadiums that have been built to host major events. Nice pictures of snow. I just came from there. At the weekend, we had the opening FIS Alpine Ski World Cup in Sölden on the glacier, just making some local promotion for our sport. So, the IOC has also, as a major part of Olympic Agenda 2020, not only looked at the facilities and ensuring that there is a big consideration for their legacy, but also making the most of the expertise that exists within the rest of the movement. Generally, the host city of the Olympic Games and the Winter Games is not necessarily an organiser that regularly features on the international circuit and the programme. Certainly not the case for all sports, and definitely that's the case in the Summer Games. So there's a big engagement which is required from the international and the national federations to develop the necessary expertise and the sports venue to run the games and to run the major events. And many persons within the organising committee for an Olympic Games are doing so for the first time, and most of them will be actually the only time in their career. There are, of course, some Olympic roadies who go from one games to the next, and they'll be moving every 4 years onwards to the next games. Some even in some specialist areas that are similar in summer and winter games will even take that trip every 2 years. But those, let's say, novices, they can't be expected to know the ins and outs either of the sports or of the organisation or of the games when they onboard on a one-off basis. And as we've already heard, as is clear to everybody, there is a definitive timeline. That's when the games are taking place. So that means that the expertise needs to be built up by then. And it's necessary, therefore, to really fast-track the knowledge, the planning, in order to be operational, training workforce, officials, carrying out training events, test events, and so on. And this really is where the international federations and the national associations can give really sound advice to the Olympic Games organisers, because that's what we as federations are doing on a day-to-day basis. For instance, just in our federation, in the International Ski Federation, we're organising 7,000 competitions on an annual basis in around 54 different countries. So there's a big expertise there in order to be able to make sure the necessary support is given to the organising committees and to help them find their way in a brand new and relatively confusing place. So the IOC has identified this. The expertise is lying within the sports federations who are running events, as I said, all around the year, all over the world, and they can make sure that the organisers are properly served in terms of advice, expertise, and personnel. Perhaps just to give you a small insight and an example for the effect of the major events, speaking about the Olympic Games and the process that we have with World Championships and our own major events. We established a bidding process for the championships, which take place every 2 years, where each of the candidates will build up their project based on a standardized questionnaire. So it means the information is the same, it's identical from all of the candidates. It's not only about who can be the most creative and sell their candidacy in the best possible way. Then afterwards we'll have an in-depth meeting with the candidates and the professionals who are working on a daily basis with the sport, so that we can effectively consult each of the candidates on a neutral basis, so that we've got a project that really is the best it can be for each of those candidates. We're also looking very much at that stage already of the legacy for the future, because these are organisers already of existing World Cup, let's say annual competitions, who then say, no, we want to take a step up and do the championships. So of course they're already well within the system, and therefore it's possible to have the discussion about a long-term approach, the investments that they are going to be making to upgrading certain facilities, and the effect that that can have then on their future competitions in terms of expanding them, reaching out into new areas. Example, which is perhaps relevant, is that when we have an important organizer of a major ski jumping competition, they wish to do the Nordic Championships, which also include cross-country skiing and Nordic combined. It means that they are going to be able to expand their offering for these additional events, but also for the recreational part. Cross-country skiing is a great recreational activity, especially nowadays when people are trying to have a more healthy outlook on what they do. And there's not a lot of recreational ski jumping activity, at least we don't recommend it. When it comes to alpine skiing, the improvements that will be made to the facilities, because that candidate, that organizer, is able to obtain an investment from the local, the regional, even the national authorities to upgrade, for example, their snowmaking equipment, or perhaps even add in new mountain transportation, new lifts. That doesn't only serve the competitions, but that's going to have a great effect for the offering for the tourist, for the recreational skier, and therefore also provide a better infrastructure for tourism. So the opportunity to carry out competitions after the events, the legacy aspect, is very dependent on having a strategy with that national association of the sport. And when it comes to the Winter Games, I looked into this whilst preparing to give this presentation. And in fact, all 12 previous Olympic Winter Games organisers are winter sports tourism destinations, and in the majority of cases, they're regular organisers of sport competitions. So in the case of our federation, FIS, some locations were already organisers before the Olympics, such as St. Moritz in Switzerland, 1928, Oslo in 1952, Albertville in 1992, Salt Lake City in 2002, and Torino in 2006, Vancouver in 2010. So nearly half of the organisers. Whereas in other cases, the Games have served as a catalyst for the organisation of future major events. Another Scandinavian example, whilst we're here in this region, the Lillehammer 1994 Games, whilst of course all over Norway there have been events in many different places, the Lillehammer Games, they enabled the inclusion of an annual classic men's downhill skiing competition to be established at the mountain of Kvitfjell every year, as well as the classic Norwegian competitions, cross-country skiing, ski jumping and Nordic combined competitions, since a little more recently, that are taking place on an annual basis. And this year, or next year, in February, the Youth Winter Olympic Games will take place there. Similarly, Sochi is going to be a regular on the calendar of the ladies' alpine skiing World Cup circuit, and they have an ambition to bid for the World Championships. And this approach in terms of carrying on and continuing to organise major events has increasingly been the case, and very much part of our discussions with our World Championship candidates and then organisers, but also with the Olympic Games organisers too. And I've just travelled this morning from St. Moritz in Switzerland, where we've been discussing the Alpine Skiing World Championships, which will take place there in 2017. And ideas of a future bid for the Olympic Games, Olympic Winter Games of course, are very much on the agenda there. So, just finally, the extensive communication that took place as part of Olympic Agenda 2020 process within the Olympic movement as a whole has also given us, the international federations, a lot of elements to include within our own activities, with many of the same issues to be addressed, albeit on a somewhat different scale in most cases. In summarising, the steps that have been taken by the International Olympic Committee with Agenda 2020, as far as the organisation of major events are concerned, they have addressed a number of the problems that have arisen as the Games and other major events have grown in size and complexity. The key goals that have been really the foundations of the whole project will and should enable the organisers to be more effective, to be more efficient, as well as being excellent, which is of course the ultimate goal. The proof will of course be in the delivery. The first evidence, the first tangible steps have been an increased number of candidates for 2024. And we will be working very hard to make sure that Olympic Agenda 2020 is not just good deliberations. It stimulated a lot of important discussions. It created some very good documentation, but it will actually have concrete and positive steps for the entire Olympic movement. That's me.
Thank you very much. Well, thank Mrs. Lewis for an excellent introduction to the Agenda 2020 of the IOC. Is there anybody who wants to ask a short informative question to Mrs. Lewis? Up there. Can we get a microphone up there? And can you please state your name before you ask your question? And if there's not a microphone up there, I'm coming to you. There we go. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Dennis and I'm from the University of Hamburg. And you just said that you already see the implementation of the Agenda 2020 and principle the sustainability approach within the 5 host or bidding cities for the Olympic Games 2024. Well, I'm from Hamburg and I can't see this at all in Hamburg, as we will build, if we get the bid, a new Olympic stadium, and in addition they plan to build a new Olympic swimming pool, while as the city is closing local swimming pools. So I would like if you could elaborate a little bit more on each host city or each bidding city. Where do you see the sustainability approach and the legacy you were talking about? Thank you.
Well, I'm unable to really give you specific answers to each of the individual candidates because I don't know them well enough. I could talk pretty much at length on the winter side, but the leader of the bid, Alfons Hermann, he's also a member of the FIS Council. He was formerly the president of the German Ski Association. And in fact, what each of the candidates have done is raise the issue of legacy from being down halfway down the list of priorities to right at the top of it. And what I can say is that from personal experience in terms of how the legacy has been a very important part of the London 2020 bid, that there has been really an important change within the city in terms of the infrastructure, the transportation systems, the regeneration of a whole quarter of the city in East London that has become now a very important place within the society, and it's being used to a big extent for as a model for the candidates now for 2024 and ones who are considering it for the future.
I saw a question over here, the guy in the middle on the left.
Yeah,
Harry, can you please state your name?
Yeah, Harry Solberg from Norway, Trondheim Business School. There's one thing that I'm missing in the 2020 agenda, and that's why not change the distribution? So instead of awarding the games to a city, why not awarding it to a country? Because that would make it much easier to use it. I mean, some cities have stadiums and others have other stadiums and so on. And then you also avoid the pressure, particularly the construction during the construction period leading up to the Olympics.
Well, to be honest, it's going to go even further than that, actually. I didn't go into the bidding part, but really just on the actual delivery of the games. But it's possible now for a city to have, let's say, multiple different venues in order to use existing facilities. We've seen now with the Tokyo Games that they've changed a lot of their venues in order actually to use existing facilities. And if you take, for example, a potential bid that could come from Sweden, where they would have the central elements of the bid. We're talking Winter Games here in Stockholm. The alpine skiing events, and I would imagine also the sliding would take place in Åre, where we've had Alpine World Championships in 2009, and will take place again in 2019, and then the Nordic events in Falun. So it's exactly this, to use existing facilities taking place over the country.
I'm going to leave the questions for now for here, okay? We're going to have a panel debate after the last speaker, okay? Thank you very much, Mrs. Lewis. We will now be moving to the third speaker. And when I said that I was kind of glad that the Netherlands wouldn't host the Euro Games 2019, I meant that because I had seen the plans for how we're going to organize that. And I thought the plans were going to bring no good to Dutch society. I am really curious about what the Euro Games has brought to their organizing country. And I would very much like to call to the fore Mr. Elchin Safarov, who was the corporate director of the European Games of 2015 in Azerbaijan. And please tell us what that has brought, what has been the legacy of the European Games to your country. Please.
At first, I'm very sorry about my poor English, but I will try to read more than to speak. Yeah, it's easy to now to tell how it was organized, and the games is over now. But I remember the first month after the election of the Baku as a host city. By the way, I'm the first employee of the operation committee, and we didn't know. Okay, what we have to do and what's the next step. Later on I will speak why the country has decided to be as a bid country. I think the answer to that question, the Azerbaijan is a 10 million population only, and 51% is the yours, which is the sport is very important lifestyle, and it's the more interest of the people to sports, not just in one or two traditional sports, but in total. That's why I think when we have started the European Games, we decided that all the plan must be created for next 3 events, not just for European Games. What I mean by that, the next year Azerbaijan will host Formula 1, and in 2017 we will host Islamic Games. That's why when I will speak about the legacy, it's not just for 2015. Azerbaijan successfully hosted the games and wrote its name into the history of European sports. The major sports event was organized according to the standards of Olympic Games. And it's a great important not only for Azerbaijan and for Europe as well. Baku has become fast a regional center of the business, tourism and sport. Later on, I will speak where and how much. The first European Games has held at Baku accredited to achievements to providing valuable legacy of the infrastructure upgrades, world-class venues, enhancement of the public services such as healthcare, education, transport. As expressed, sport is perhaps the biggest legacy for the Games of Azerbaijan's future. One of the aim of Baku 2015 was to encourage the sports potential at the grassroots level and bring sport directly into the everyday life of Azerbaijanis. The Games has led 11 permanent new and revenue venues. By the way, on some information, it goes that Azerbaijan or Baku built new venues for the European Games. That's not true. The venues was started before the election of the country, but we have to be finished before the games itself. These new facilities left a meaningful for the young people and athletes of Azerbaijan. This is, I think, one of the biggest legacy for us. The city of Baku had already invested significant transport projects that were ready for the time of the games and had major tourism, trade, and economic benefits. First time in the life of, by the way, I worked 17 years before, just on oil companies as a financial manager, and I know what is the economic industry means for Azerbaijan. Sport industry, it's not same as in Europe, because in Europe it takes, I don't know, 70 years maybe. But in Azerbaijan, first time when you have an event, you have to think about the revenue as well. This includes upgrades to metro and bus public transport system, new highways, and the development of Azerbaijan International Rail Network to connect Baku with Turkey, Georgia, and China. In addition, a new international airport terminal has added 12 aircraft gates to provide a total capacity of 5 million passengers per year across all terminal international airport of Baku. There were always two distinct legacy objectives from the European Games in Baku. The first was physical legacy. The European Games was always a part of vision to use sport of build of nation of Azerbaijan. So the facilities there was built for sports such as the Olympic Stadium, National Gymnastic Arena, or swimming complex. We call it Baku Aquatic Center. Will be used for the Islamic Games in 2017. And then the Olympic Stadium will be used for European Football Championship in 2020. There was the second objective, which were to create the human legacy. Through the created scheme and the employment of almost 80% Azerbaijan staff, there was a knowledge development and transfer which should allow the successful delivery of the events listed above as well to the other events such as Formula 1 and Chess Olympiad, which will be next year. By the way, when we create the staff, I would like to thank all international staff from Europe, which was invited to Baku to as a consultant, and it was very, very good, successful decision of the Baku European Games Operation Committee, where we invited professionals to Baku, because in 30 months to build that team, international team, and to take that responsibility as a country and to provide that games in that standard, it wasn't so easy. I would like to thank them through you guys. By playing host to one of the world's biggest sporting events, Baku Olympic host city has the opportunity to provide lasting sporting legacies that help to promote and develop sport not only on his host city itself, but also in the regions of Azerbaijan. The impact of the 5 Olympic rings has been completed and then Europe. Its own continental. Europe now has its own continental multi-sport event. The value has been demonstrated to the television via 145 countries across the globe that these European Games were broadcast. It's around 845 million spectators. The European Games for Azerbaijan, a country, has regained its independence after the collapse of Soviet Union. It's 24 years only. Are also opportunity to introduce its culture and national values to Europe. If it is possible to say so, just as the 1964 Olympic Games in Tokyo and 1988 Games on the Seoul introduced Japan and South Korea to the world, the first European Games are Azerbaijan's worldwide presentation. Despite difficulties resulting from the occupation of the 20% of territory by Armenia, At the end of the last century, Azerbaijan have managed to resolve the vast majority of the problems. Official indicators shows achievement of threefold economic growth, poverty reduction from 50 to 5%, and pursuing of consistent energy policy in the challenging geopolitical environment. Azerbaijan has started playing the important part of European energy security. The Trans-Anadolu and Trans-Adriatic pipeline project, which will form the part of sourcing gas corridor, promise to deliver Azerbaijan gas to Europe in 2020. With Muslim contingents a majority of the population, Azerbaijan also attracts attention with a very important things, which is the tolerance. There is no confrontation of religious or racial grounds. New mosques, churches, synagogues are built in Azerbaijan, while old one of the renovated are made available to believers. Azerbaijan is also trying to maintain and develop the dialogue between the religious civilizations. International, intercultural, and humanitarian forums, which was held in Baku, have brought together the former heads of the state of government. One of the big, and I think I should read that, the big legacy of my country is the volunteerism. It's easy to say in Europe. By the way, I would like to thank all volunteers here, which helps us every day, everywhere. Thank you very much. And volunteerism in Azerbaijan is the new, I will say, event, which we didn't have before. But when we start the European Games, and 30,000 youth volunteers was registered, but the 12,500 was involved to the games. I think it's the good result of where we can say we didn't know that even one of the, at the beginning we say that we will have two kind of risks. The first one is volunteerism, and the second one will be sale of tickets. Fortunately, it was wrong calculation. We had enough volunteers, and we sold 600,000 tickets for the events. The organization of the games has surpassed all expectations. A large number of the local volunteers got involved, and their role cannot be overestimated. They carried out the work with such of enthusiasm, diligence, and responsibilities that became one of the important elements of success of European Games. And as a previous mayor of Athletes Village, I would like to say a few notes on the athletes' emotion. I didn't get any bad comments from the athletes or representative of 50 national committee of 50 countries. And we tried to organize the games on the Olympic standard, which we call it Olympic standards, but maybe Olympic standard more than the European Games. But and another legacy which I would like to say about that, it's the legacy which we left for next host city. As I told before that 2 years ago we didn't have any manuals, any instructions, any directions how to organize that. But now the European Olympic Committee has the old manuals, and we gave that intangible assets to the European Olympic Committee for the next games. Thank you very much for your attention, but I have 3 minutes clip. I think that's the end. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention.
No. Thank you. Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Safarov, for sharing your experiences. Could you please stay for just a short time? Yeah, for sharing your experiences and telling you what your event has brought to the Azerbaijan people and Azerbaijan society. I know that a lot of people would want to go into a debate with Mr. Safarov. We will do that at the panel, but if there's someone who wants to ask a brief, informative question, 1 or 2 questions, we take it right now. You up there? Can you state your name, please? Brief, informative question, please.
Yeah, Robert Kemper, German TV ARD. Mr. Safarov, I have a couple of questions. I'm trying to do it brief.
Brief, informative question.
The first, I want to do brief. How much money you spent in total for hosting this European Olympic Games? My second question is, how much money you gave in total to the European Olympic Committee that you have that you could host this Olympic Games? And the third question is also brief. What is the legacy for the opposition in your country, for the human rights activists, and for the political prisoners?
Later on. We'll take the question later on, but the first 2 questions, please.
Yeah, yes, I can tell that, including the all assets which we have for the legacy, as a legacy for the next events, we spent $760 million. For the next question was about how much BEGOC paid to the European Olympic Committee, you said. 0, because we have not any liabilities to the European Olympic Committee to pay the amount. The third question was...
I think we'll take the third question when we go to the panel.
Okay.
Another question?
Yes, thanks very much for that illuminating presentation. My name's Andy Brown from the Sports Integrity Initiative. I was just wondering how the Azeri family could justify spending that sort of money on mega stadiums and mega events when we heard yesterday that the average wage for doctors and lawyers in the country is $150.
The answer will be very simple. The European Games, or the budget for the European Games, which was it's not from the current budget of the Azerbaijan. We have enough oil reserves, and we know that Azerbaijan, one of the new European countries, where, as I told you before, unfortunately, only after Eurovision, that some of European countries can recognize Azerbaijan as a country. Here, our investment was just for first, as a calculate, as I told about the legacies for the country, for the people, and plus for investigation of the country. It's normal. I think all cities is doing the same. They are paying the money and bidding the sport events for the image of the country.
We're going to leave it with that. We're going to continue the discussion after the 4th speaker. Thank you very much. Okay, I would now like to call Mr. Hans Bruyninckx to the floor, please. And he's our 4th and last speaker. Mr. Bruyninckx is currently the Executive Director of the European Environment Agency. He has been that since 2013, I believe. Before that, he was a professor in political sciences at the KU Leuven. And as such, he was, for instance, responsible for the Sport Governance Observatory, which you have been heard so much about during this Play the Game. Mr. Hans Bruyninckx should be talking about the global sports, the time for a changing climate, and times for climate change. Clearly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to this event. I'm a bit of the outsider. I realize that. I will not talk about mega stadiums, mega events, or mega budgets. I will talk about mega trends on this planet. And one of the mega trends on this planet is called climate change, right? So I will link the future of sports to climate change. And there is a global reality of a changing climate. And when we look forward towards 2100, which means that if you're born today, you will be alive then, you will be 85 years old, so it's one generation away. We expect at the current rate that we will have an average increase of temperature on this planet of about 4 to 5 degrees, average. Yeah? From a European perspective, for example, we know that Europe heats up faster than the global average, and that there are parts of Europe like the Mediterranean and the far north that warm up faster than the European average. So this will dramatically change the face of the planet. That's why we meet in Paris at the end of next month. And I know this is not your topic, but I can tell you this is a very hot global topic. The goal there is to stay within 2 degrees centigrade average temperature increase, which means that all countries on this planet, everyone, will have to conduct climate policies, which is rather different from what we have today under the Kyoto Protocol, which might ring a bell, where it's only the industrialized countries that have to do something. And we are looking for binding agreements with all countries on this planet. The European Union, and I'm responsible for the official European institution that reports and gathers and analyzes all environment and climate data for all European countries, and we do the reporting to the Global Climate Change Secretariat, for example. Europe has poured all of these long-term views in its 7th Environment Action Programme. And for 2050, it says that we will live well within the limits of the planet. And I think this living well has a clear relationship to your business, because living well is increasingly associated with having a happy, healthy, and active lifestyle. And in order to guarantee that, by 2050, Europe says that we will need to move to a circular economy and deal with resources that are becoming increasingly scarce and that are not to be found in Europe in any serious way. We will need to take care of biodiversity and ecosystems, and I will come to that later as it relates to sports, and that we will need to go low carbon. Yeah. And we will need to decouple our resource use on this planet. Now, all of this is obviously related to sports, the organization of mega events, building legacies. If a circular economy is the demolition of stadiums that have been built, I don't think that is what we have in mind, right? This is a real paradigm shift, because this today I was in a meeting where, or a panel discussion where they talked about the 3 circles of sustainability, the social, the economic, and the environmental, and where they magically overlap in the middle, we put the arrow and we call that sustainable development. This is obviously intellectual nonsense, because on a limited planet, you cannot have a little bit of sustainability. The real challenge is that within the limits of the planet, we will have to organize the systems that deliver to society. The energy system, the food system, the mobility system, the built environment system, and what about the sports system? Yeah, that I think is the question for the future. Now, this is a global imperative, because on the x-axis here, you have human development. And if you have a score of above 0.8, you have a good life, high quality of life. If you want to live within the limits of the planet, you need to do it within the resources that we have available. And each dot here is a country. You see how many countries are living well within the limits of the planet, not a single one. The old paradigm was that first we become rich, and then all of a sudden, in rich countries that are usually democratic, we start to ask our institutions and our politicians to give us more quality of life, a better environment, healthier lifestyles, and we would go down. Now, this has not happened. We've delivered partially on less pollution, and this is a big deal in many countries of the world, less so in Europe, absolute pollution, but it has not materialized in terms of living within the limits of the planet. So this is the future. We will all need to go to that quadrant. Okay? Now, I have called, also in my previous work on sports a type of activity and organization that is calling itself exceptional. That's why attacks in football stadiums are not criminal acts, why racism is not called racism and prosecuted, why bribery is not called bribery. I mean, that's the exceptionalism of sports. And I think it also applies to a lot of what I will talk about today. I think in a lot of the world of sports, there's a complete illiteracy and ignorance around issues that are actually rather important on a global scale and outside the doors of a football stadium or whatever sports arena you're talking about. Yeah? I think in general, the reaction has been, this is not our problem, so we can ignore it. Just like some time ago, we could ignore racism in sports, we could ignore gender issues in sports, we could ignore all sorts of issues in sports. A more refined variation of this is obviously, this is not our responsibility. We're sports. Climate change is not our responsibility. This is not our world. You know, we have nothing to do with this. So let's investigate a bit how this works. I'll give you an example. I was last summer I was in California, and I've seen exceptionalism at work. This is what you see every 10 miles now on a highway in California in some shape or form. Serious drought, help save water, we're losing our agriculture, you know. This is what you then see in parts of California. This is Palm Springs, but you see it all over California, where actually when you're sitting at a table you don't get water anymore because we need to save water, but golf courses seem to be on a different planet. There the water is flowing quite happily. Exceptionalism, right? Now if you look at 800,000 gallons a day in Palm Springs to keep one golf court going versus what we could do with this same water in, for example, agriculture or in the domestic use, where actually California is pushing people a lot to save water, there is clearly a case of exceptionalism. The bizarre thing is that other activities that are related to water and free time do suffer greatly from water shortages. In California, they had a lot of these dams where there was a lot of activity, water skiing, boating, sailing. That is almost disappearing because it's simply not there anymore. The water levels are dropping. By the way, I wasn't only in LA for just to look at water shortage. I'm actually the father of a Special Olympian who won a gold medal. And I would like to say the following. The Special Olympics are special, right? There is no cheating, there is no doping. This is about the purity of sports. Yeah? It's hardly recognized, right? It's hardly recognized. This is not where you see the people from the IOC in large numbers. This is not where you see the money. It's all volunteers based on all sorts of other values than we see in other sports. But this as a side note. Okay, so back to the planet. It's out of my system now, very good. Back to the planet. I think the responses to the environment and climate issue in sports has been rather typical for what we have seen, and I'm serious about that, in the 1970s and 80s in many other sectors. Yeah? The response is, let's talk about 50 easy ways to save the planet. Yeah? Let's recycle, reduce, reuse, recycle, right? That's going to save the planet, and it's clearly going to make sports green and within the planetary limits. Yeah? The Green Week in the NBA. Yeah? I don't know how many of you have been to NBA games and know the whole enterprise there. The Green Week in the NBA is probably not going to make the NBA live within the limits of the planet. Yeah? Then we have all sorts of advisors that actually do what we've been telling our citizens also. Change a light bulb, you know, recycle, throw away the plastic cup in the right bin, and we will get there. I don't think this is an approach that is very credible, and it's definitely not going to work on a planetary scale. Then we have more embedded or programmatic approaches. And I would like to mention two here. One is a sort of approach where you have the Green Sports Alliance, where they look at selection, and also the Olympic Agenda 2020, and I'll come to it in more detail later on, where clearly you are looking at selection criteria when you are working with bids. We heard part of that. Where environmental management systems of the type that were developed in the 1980s and 90s are rather popular. You work on some of your inputs, and it's primarily waste reduction. That is the main emphasis here. And you have an improvement agenda. Yeah? And the real breakthrough then is you have 200 electric cars in the big event for those 2 weeks, and that is the breakthrough that is more fundamental. So that is that type of agenda. From the perspective of the environment and climate, I would call this a very sport and event-centric approach. It is clearly starting from, we are a sports federation, And let's think about our narrow world and what we can do, but there is very little relationship with these broad megatrends that we could discuss at length. It's also rather event-centric, as has been evaluated by many others. And there is often no serious reflection on the fundamental issues. There is no serious reflection on what it means to live within limits of the planet, to organize healthy, sporty lifestyles within limits of the planet. Let me take a look at the Olympic Agenda 2020. In recommendation 4, include sustainability in all aspects of the Olympic Games. And there is indeed reference to all the points that have been raised before. And in recommendation 5, it's include sustainability within the Olympic movement's daily operations, change the light bulbs in Lausanne and make offset the kilometers that are flown in airplanes. I mean, there is an environmental management approach to the whole business. But when you read all the stuff that you can find around it, there are no clear targets. I mean, we are working towards a global target on climate change. It's rather clear what it is. You could include it in your program and say, yes, we want to become climate neutral Olympic Games. We will work on, I mean, there are no targets, no deadlines, no links with major environmental or climate topics or policies. So it's sort of free floating engagement. And I think indeed the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. And I know that there are people who will actually evaluate in a serious way or in a more serious way what is happening with these sorts of environmental engagements when it comes to this type of sports events. Now, the question that is broader and I think more fundamental in one direction is, will a changing climate lead to changing sports? And in fact, Sports Illustrated, which some of you might know for different covers, has done a 2007 issue with the title, As the Planet Changes, So Do the Games We Play. 2007, right? The Climate Institute in Australia did a serious study on sports and climate impacts. Yeah? And I have to say that what you read there is of a rather different nature than let's use LED lighting when we meet for sports, or let's recycle our cups better. They actually predict that most of the sports that are so dear to Australia, and that is very much an outdoor and sports-oriented culture, that they might disappear by 2030 and 2050 under conditions of climate change. And this has to do with all sorts of impacts of climate change. For example, higher temperatures. This is a picture from the Australian Open, Maria Sharapova. We've seen her in better poses. Tips for running in humidity. We expect higher humidity in a number of hot areas already. Yeah? You know the impact of the pressures on the body in high temperatures and humidity. Droughts. Yeah? Olympic venue. What this lady is actually doing is there is a drought there and she is painting the grass green. Yes? Painting the grass green. Yeah? I know environmental stuff is probably not your thing, but painting the grass green, yeah? It's hard to stay calm when you see this type of stuff. Huh? This is in Dutch, so I will explain what it is. The green is the temperature in cities, and this is in Belgium. The yellow line is the mortality rate in cities, yeah? I'm not a statistician, but there is a pretty good correlation between those two, or a pretty bad one. Climate change, yeah? If you link it to sports, where the tension, the pressure on the city, on the body, I mean, is even higher, this is what we can expect with very high certainty, yeah? Impacts of climate change on extreme weather events, yeah? Changing wind patterns. The sport of sailing in serious parts of the world is seriously threatened in the future because the equipment is simply not built for 30 to 40% higher wind conditions, peak conditions, which is what they expect for the North Sea, for example. Snow patterns, yeah. I'm glad that Solden still has a glacier. If we look forward to 2100, we expect very different evolution for most glaciers on this planet. Now we can be creative in solutions, the electric Formula 1, but probably we need to ask more serious questions. This is the decarbonization trajectory for Europe for 2050, binding. The power sector, complete decarbonized. Industry, very high decarbonization. Transport, other sectors, very high decarbonization. What will be the impact of sports? And on sports? Is there any serious consideration in the sports world about that? I'm not talking academically, but about people who actually give direction to the world of sports. The urban and built environment, this is Shanghai, obviously, where running in this type of air pollution, when you breathe 10 to 40 times the amount of air that you normally breathe, probably is not a good idea, especially not when you're a woman that might be expecting a child, because this type of air pollution, we know, has a serious impact on the genetic expression of the cardiovascular system, and I would think you would hope your child has the same cardiovascular system in the future to do sports as you have. The food system, sports and healthy food, of course they go together, of course they do. Well, what sort of food is the image of the sports industry, and what is the impact on the environment? Agriculture being one of the main pressures on the environment. Is this the image we want to give? I can tell you that this type of food and macho image has a very different impact on the environment and on climate than a healthy diet in the previous image. The mobility system, Tell me again how you drive your car to the gym to ride a bike that goes nowhere, Is that the healthy lifestyle within the limits of the planet? Or should we be thinking about cycling as a healthy lifestyle, not necessarily a sport, that can contribute to living within the limits of this planet? I'm almost done. I have 1 minute and 26 seconds left. I'm timing myself here. The obsession with time and sports, no. I think sports is an economic sector of significance. You read about the added value to the economy, you read about employment, innovation. I think we have to be clear, sports has a high innovative potential. Social and symbolic significance. Very few things unite people and make them motivated and all excited than your allegiance to your sports team. There are also issues of proportionality. By 2020, the global community is trying to get together a climate fund of $100 billion. We are hotly debating that for Paris. We're involved in those negotiations. There is about an estimated $1,000 billion a year in illegal betting. Proportionality. There are some issues that the sports world might have to deal with when we're trying to deal with global problems of maybe higher significance than what a third division team in Belgium does and what the gains are in parts of China. But with all that importance, do you really think that the world of sports can say we are not part of the problem nor of the solution? I mean, that's not credible. That is just not credible. We live on one planet and we're all part of it. So the clear message, and this is the last slide, I think the times of exceptionalism are over. They're over in terms of governance, and you've discussed that at length for all sorts of reasons, but they are also over in terms of climate and environmental issues. I think sports needs to embrace the circumstances of the 21st century, and the boundary conditions are that we will live with 10 billion people on a finite planet that all expect a healthy and decent lifestyle. We expect serious impacts of climate change and resource and biodiversity stuff on sports, so it's time to take that into account and reflect seriously on that beyond recycling plastic cups and adding a couple of electric cars to your venue. I think sports can be part of the solution, clearly so. There is a lot of creative potential there. I also think it's an ethical imperative, and there is a sense of urgency. Sustainability is not about the next generations. It's about this generation. Yeah? Europe promises a girl that is born today, by 2050 this girl will be 35 years old, that it will live in a low carbon, circular economy with high ecosystem values, and that will give her a healthy and happy life. I think we've got a lot of work to do in the next 3.5 decades, so we better not wait and start going. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruyninckx, for a very, well, at least wake-up call to the sports sector. Coming from a speed skating nation, I'm a little worried. We might change our identity. But thank you also for remembering us that even in all this simplicity, you don't need a big mega event for sport to be of personal significance to its participants and their parents. Thank you very much for that, sharing that. I would like to call off the speakers to the panel, please, to the floor. So Mr. Safarov, Mrs. Lewis, Mrs. Zimbalist. And we will have now, I think, a panel debate which will last, I think, at least the formal part of the debate will last to 6:30. I'm sure you will continue the debate during dinner, and we will continue the debate in the second session. You will have the opportunity to ask questions, but as the chairman, I allow myself the opportunity to ask a couple of questions to the panelists themselves, and I'm waiting till all the panelists are set up with their microphones, which might take a while. And maybe, Mr. Bruyninckx, just to kick off, is it actually possible that you got mega events with people traveling all over the globe as part of sustainable policy, or should we just skip mega events?
I think well, do you hear me? Yeah, okay. I think there is a lot more possible than what is done today, that's for sure. I think if the starting point is really to embrace the sort of boundary conditions and not do what we still do also in the regular economy. We pop a bottle of champagne because the green economy has grown by 50%, from 6 to 9%. Well, that is not the goal. The goal is to green the economy. The goal is not to add a little bit of green paint on events and on sports in general. The goal is to fundamentally ask yourself, how can we change that part of the organization in a more fundamental way? And I do think that, of course, there will always be an impact, but I do think that a lot more can be done than what is done today. And I think if you really want to set an example in that direction, that there are probably good opportunities in the more iconic big events, because they do have a sort of signaling function to others. But then you have to do it in a very fundamental and serious way, which is not the case today.
Mrs. Lewis, Mr. Bruyninckx is saying that we're not really pushing the limit as far as he should like it to be. Mrs. Zimbalist said that your 2020 agenda was palliative. How do you feel about that? Are you satisfied with the progress you've been making?
Well, as I said, it now has to be implemented. You know, the first step was to agree that these are the principles, and now the implementation phase is being rolled out. And the IOC is organising, with all of the international federations, 2 important workshops coming up in 2 weeks as part of the so-called IF Forum, the International Federations Forum, which is in Lausanne, middle of November. And the first day, I think it's very topical for where we are here with Play the Game, because the first day will be about governance and integrity, and perhaps Paquerette mentioned it in her presentation. And Then the second day will be about sustainability and environmental initiatives. So that already at this first stage of the implementation, the international federations are being involved in the process in order that they will actually have clear information, measures, instructions to introduce into their own systems, also policies, and it is foreseen to have, let's say, statements that are going to come out of there, so that the international federations will be buying into the whole process. So it is early days, and at the moment it's the policies that exist, and now, yeah, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Within the International Ski Federation, when it comes to the environment, we introduced our policy, the so-called Minor Manifesto in 1994, which is anchored into all of our activities. It is connected mostly to the major events because, as you said, that's where the profile is, and it's where the biggest issues are potentially going to happen. But nevertheless, all of the organisers have to integrate environmental policies, management, expertise within their organisation, within their committees, and it's become more and more important. You're quite right.
Let's talk some more about how the IOC is eating the pudding. China is hosting the 2022 Olympics. 6 weeks ago, the IOC sent its review committee to China. They came out and they said China is working according to the 2020 guidelines, and it's embracing sustainability and it's embracing affordability. What is happening in China? China is going to have its ice rinks in Beijing, and it's going to have alpine and Nordic skiing 60 miles north and 120 miles north of Beijing. In order to make that trip a suitable and doable trip, they're building high-speed rail. China is not putting the cost of the high-speed rail in its budget. There was an article in the Chinese press that said the high-speed rail is going to cost somewhere between $5 and $10 billion, but it's not in the budget. That's how they're meeting the affordability criterion. What else is happening at the Chinese ski slopes? The Chinese ski slopes are in North China. They're very close to the Gobi Desert. They get between 10 and 15 inches a year of precipitation, total precipitation. In order to have ski events there, they have a water diversion program from the south of China into an area of North China that has the most severe and serious water shortage imaginable, worse than California's. They're going to have to bring water from the south. They're going to have to desalinize water from the ocean in order to have water to freeze to make the snow. That water that's being used to make the snow for the ski events is not going to the agriculture in that region. The North China Plain is one of the most important agricultural regions in China. If you want an example of destroying the planet, and you want an example of the nonsense of Agenda 2020, look at China. There's a parallel story for Brazil and parallel stories elsewhere. This is not just a matter of the IOC is warming up and trying to figure out how to implement Agenda 2020. This is a matter of the IOC protecting its business model.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bruyninckx, may I have your viewpoint on this? And then I go to Mrs. Lewis, yes.
Well, the examples are paramount in this direction, because that has been how the model has worked. But it has always been, it has also been the model that has worked for urbanization on much of the planet, for the mobility system that we have been developing. Our most recent 5-year report on the state of the environment and climate is pretty clear. We are dealing with fundamentally unsustainable systems of production and consumption. Yeah? Sports is a part of that. They're fundamentally unsustainable. So we will need to change these systems, because you don't make systems that are unsustainable sustainable by perfecting them. Yeah? You have to do other things. And therefore, you have to ask the fundamental questions and go to the basics. And the basics is clearly not to divert water to an area somewhere in the north. I don't know any detail of that, so I cannot make any claims. But there have been multiple examples of that. So that is clearly not the way to go.
Mrs. Lewis.
Yeah, so as far as the train is concerned, actually this is not being built for the games.
That's what they say.
No, but it isn't. It's being built for...
It's being built for ski slopes that shouldn't be ski slopes. And
no,
where
it's
1% of the population can afford to go if they're interested in skiing.
This
Mr.
is
Zimbalist, Mr. Lewis now.
No,
I'm
this
sorry.
is one of the stops actually, and it's in order to enable the citizens of Beijing to be able to travel to different parts of China for their recreation. This is part of their plan anyway. They have looked actually to have the location where there'll be the alpine skiing and the sliding venue that is on that axis. In order to utilize this train that's being built. So this is actually not something that's being built specially for the games, and that's why it belongs to a separate infrastructure budget.
Yeah, well, the north of the ski slopes is the Gobi Desert. I'm not sure what kind of recreation they have in mind.
Okay. I think you're going to continue the discussion in a while.
Yeah.
People in the room, I see a question right over there to the left, and then over here, and then over there. You start over there. Can you please state your name and who you want to ask the question to? There's a microphone coming to you right now.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Tim Walters. I'm from Okanagan College in Canada, which is about halfway between the Alberta tar sands, third largest oil reserve on the planet Earth, and Vancouver, where we recently hosted the Winter Olympics and the Women's World Cup. And I bring this up because it's pertinent to the question, maybe moving away from the actual environmental impact of putting on the events to something that Mr. Safarov said during his presentation, which is that it was worthwhile spending public resources on his mega event because, quote, it improved the image of our country. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that it's become almost a criteria of hosting one of these events to be a petro-state. If you look at who has and will be hosting World Cups, Qatar, Russia,
Can you formulate your
Brazil.
question, please?
My question is whether or not the panelists think it's appropriate for mega events to be used as tools of greenwashing by petro-states that are going to be responsible for it being impossible to play sports on this planet any longer.
You're asking the question to every of the panelists. I'm going from left to right, Mr. Zimbalist.
I'm going to pass.
Okay. Mrs. Lewis?
No, I'm sorry, I don't really get actually the concrete question there.
That these tournaments are now being given again and again with increasing regularity to countries like Azerbaijan, Russia, Brazil, Canada, which are among the leading petro-states that ultimately are the ones providing the fuel that is destroying the planet and everything in it. And that they're being used as greenwashing tools by these nations to make them appear more palatable to the outside world.
Well, the latest set of candidates for the Olympic Games for 2024, they haven't included those nations. It's France with Paris, Italy with Rome, Hungary with Budapest, Germany with Hamburg, and the United States with LA. So potentially it's bucked that trend in this round, and it's certainly not going to be the case with the candidates coming for the 2026 Olympic Winter Games. Your example is really, let's say, touching on other sports, even though, there were bids for the previous Summer Games in the preliminary phase. That's correct.
Okay, Mr. Safarov, do you want to comment on that?
Yep. When I told that the European Games not was only for the good image of the country, it was one of the reasons. That's the difference.
Mr. Bruyninckx?
Yeah, I can't comment on the politics of it, but it's quite clear that if we want to stay within the 2 degrees, and there is reason scientifically to do that we are talking about what we call in our jargon a carbon budget, which means that if we would dig up all the reserves of oil and gas and coal and do with it what we do, is burn it primarily in rather inefficient ways to move ourselves from place A to B or to warm badly insulated houses, this is not going to work. So we're increasingly talking about the politics of leaving it into the ground. Yeah. And we're talking about divestment movements instead of investment movements in this type of industry. So in the long run, it's quite clear that decarbonization is not compatible with the current energy trajectory on which we are. And there is a link with some of the countries that organize. That's clear. But there is also a link with quite a few sports. Huh? I mean, I'm happy to hear that you are prepared to organize Formula One. But on a trajectory of decarbonization, I think the fundamental question is, what is the place of Formula One in that type of world under the current conditions? Yeah.
Legitimate question. We're going to move to the next question, the lady in the black jersey. And then the Mr. in the blue jersey over there. Yeah.
Hi, Naomi Westland from Amnesty International. Events that come under the Olympic umbrella are supposed to put sport at the service of the harmonious development of society. In the run-up to the European Games, there was a really harsh crackdown on human rights in Azerbaijan, with government critics targeted, arrested on trumped-up charges and jailed. I'd be interested to hear how you square that crackdown with Olympic principles and with a positive legacy, and also maybe how that would fit with Agenda 2020.
I think you're addressing the question to Mr. Safarov?
Yeah, and maybe Sarah Lewis on the Agenda 2020 side.
My vision is that question of the human rights, not discussion of with me, because I'm not a politic here. But probably you need, this is the question to politics. But if someone too much worried about the human rights of the Azerbaijan citizens, we have a lot of problems. And one of the, just example.
There is a question that concerns us all.
Okay, stop.
Please, you get the chance to say that a little later, please.
Okay.
Please allow Mr. Safarov to give a decent answer, okay? You will get your chance later on.
Sport never was the element of the politics in my country, and that's why. And I think that most of the questions which was prepared to my side, it's not the place to answer them. Thank you.
Good, Mr. over there.
My name is Johannes Kotrek. I come from Vienna. Maybe Mr. Zimbalist and Ms. Lewis aren't so far away as it seems. I have a question, Ms. Lewis. There are talks about restructuring the Winter Olympics program, maybe because of the lack of snow and the lack of applicant cities. Is it true that you want to abolish the 50-kilometer race and the downhill? And is it true that the Olympic Committee is thinking about abolishing the Winter Olympics because of the said problems?
No to all of those points. Basically, what the IOC wants to do is to review in depth the entire program. And up until now, the program has basically consisted of each sport. So within the Winter Games, they consider there to be 7 sports, which is basically 7 federations. So it was either on the program or not on the program, and with all of the events that sport, that federation chose. In the case then of all of the events you've mentioned come under the umbrella office, 6 disciplines with their multiple different events within that. The new approach within the decision-making in terms of the program will basically focus on every single one of the individual events instead of just the 7 sports, be it skiing, ice hockey, ice skating, bobsleigh, skeleton, luge and curling and biathlon. And so now it'll go into depth in all of those. Now, within the IOC, within different parts of it, they have discussed what area should we be looking at? Are the lengthy cross-country races and also biathlon for that to that extent? Are they too long? Is that still up to date with the current interests of youngsters, of the public? Is the downhill taking place? Is it it uses obviously a large mountain, which limits then the number of nations that are able then to carry out the event. But nevertheless, on the other side, they want to look at having a flexible approach so that, for example, if a city or a country like Finland were to consider organising the Olympic Winter Games, they would have a possibility to carry out the downhill in Norway. It's within Scandinavia or within Sweden, at another place which is within an easily manageable area. So as far as the International Ski Federation is concerned, for sure, we will be making sure that we're not only defending all of the current events which are on the programme, but also actually looking at some more new ones and some innovations in order to maximise the programme and the opportunity of the Games. But yes, certainly the IOC is looking at also solutions, for example, in terms of the construction of the sliding track. That's a major investment, and the legacy connected to that. In regard to the jumping hills, there are 2 jumping hills, the normal hill, the large hill, and that's also something up for discussion. But in any case, they now, having got the candidates for 2024, are looking carefully and want to discuss together with the federations the vision for 2026, how also to make sure that the Winter Games are an attractive proposition to have a lot of candidates.
I'm guessing that answered your question. I'm hoping that answered your question. Well, continue maybe after the formal session. Over here. And then the guy over there, and then up there. Andreas, up to you.
Thank you. Andreas Elios from Norway. Thank you for interesting interventions. I have 2 questions to Mr. Safarov and 1 to Zimbalist. First, Safarov, how much help did Baku and the European Games get from Lord Sebastian Coe and his business to get the European Games? That's the first question. Second is, why did not Baku apply for the Summer Olympics in 2024? And to Zimbalist, would you recommend Baku to apply for the Summer Olympics, and why or why not?
Mr. Safarov first.
Yeah.
Sebastian Coe in 2024.
No, the first question was who helped to be a candidate of Baku. Am I right? The first question.
First question was about Lord Sebastian Coe and the help he gave to you before the European Games. How much help did you get from him?
Okay, I would like to inform that Baku was only one city as a candidate, so we didn't need any helps from anyone to be at the bidder country. And the second question was about, I forgot about that.
Will you be bidding for 2024, and if not, why not?
Why we didn't?
Yeah.
Right. It's already closed.
It's already closed. I think it was late for that, but the venues which we have, the 80% was ready and enough, but I think 15th of October was the last date.
Have you contemplated bidding? Have you thought about bidding?
We would like to be, yeah.
Are you bidding for 2028?
Why not?
Possibly, okay.
Possibly.
Mr. Zimbalist.
Under present circumstances, I would not recommend that they bid for 2028. Also, just to clarify something, because it's been mentioned several times that there are 5 bidders for 5 candidate cities for hosting 2024. Hamburg is going to vote on November 29th. It's likely that it will pass, but it's not a foregone conclusion that Hamburg will be in the race. Also, the Los Angeles City Council gave Mayor Eric Garcetti the right to sign the papers to be an applicant or candidate city, but they also reserved for themselves the right to withdraw and to not sign the financial guarantee once the Los Angeles committee puts out a bid in more detail. Because they, of course, lost 8 months when Boston was going to be the U.S. representative, and then they had something like 15 days to put out a bid, and the bid is very general. So it's not a foregone conclusion that both Hamburg and Los Angeles will be in the race.
Okay. Up to you, yeah. And then up to you over there.
Mr. Safarov, Robert Kemper, German TV ARD again. Regarding my question after your presentation, how much money you gave to the European Olympic Committee? The German NOC told us that from the revenues from your sponsorship and your TV rights, you gave 25 million to the EOC. You said you gave no money to the EOC. Could you please clarify that?
Yes, of course.
And my second question is for Sarah Lewis. Sarah, for Mr. Safarov, the issue of political prisoners in Azerbaijan regarding to the European Olympic Games is too political. Would you go perhaps with the Winter Games if Baku would be a candidate? Would it be a candidate for you where you would prefer to go? Or what's your personal opinion as General Secretary of FIS?
Mr. Safarov first.
Yeah. The host city contract exactly says that BEGOC has no any responsibilities to pay any of the European Olympic Committee or the NLC's any kind of amount. That's why an official says that Baku European Games Operation Committee didn't pay any amount to the European Games, European Olympic Committee.
Mr. Lewis, would you like to go to with FIS to Baku?
Well, it's a hypothetical question because they're not on our program and not carrying out events in Azerbaijan, and it's not a national association that we're working with in that effect. So basically, it's not an answer that I could speak for from a technical standpoint or anything like that. But in terms of would we like to build up activities, absolutely. I mean, there are no countries that we wouldn't like to build them up, but we wouldn't like to, and we for sure would never start from the top down by carrying out a major high-profile event and then trying to build up the sport, rather the other way round, and looking at programs that we have to so-called bring children to the snow, carrying out development level events, and then growing the sport in that way, and not just to bring in the big show, as it were, and then try to see if the sport were to develop afterwards.
Could I say that you're hesitant?
Well, you know, it's a hypothesis because it's not a nation which is active within our program.
Okay. The Mr. at the back, you don't want to ask any questions? Okay, up to you then.
Yeah, Mr. Safarov, I was very interested to hear that you're considering bidding for the Olympics in 2024 and 2028, or would maybe consider a bid. I just wondered if you could reassure the audience here how you'd meet the human rights requirements in the IOC's Agenda 2020 if you were to submit such a bid.
I don't know about these requirements, and that's why I'm not responsible to sign any of that requirements. I'm the corporate director of the Baku European Olympic Committee, and all questions which about the European Games, I'm here to answer. I don't know who will be on next bidding, the organization committee or who.
I think we've got room for 2 or 3 questions. Are there any other people that want to ask questions? Yeah, go ahead. And then you.
Laura Robinson from Canada. This question is for Ms. Lewis. Vancouver was called the Sustainable Games, and the cross-country venue there has no public transit to it. They destroyed a rainforest to make it, and excuse me, and a bear habitat to make it. They illegally salted the trails. They did not get an environmental assessment done by the Ministry of the Environment, federally or provincially, but they did use several tons of salt on the trails to harden the snow up because it's extremely moist. It's a rainforest, and they took out hundreds of trucks loaded with lumber out of that rainforest to make trails wide enough to fit a lumber truck through. And I would like to ask you, how is that sustainable?
I actually understood that they had a pretty good recreational activity taking place within the cross-country centre, not only in the winter but also in the summer, with mountain biking and with hiking and with Nordic walking and so on. Obviously, the examples that you made, normally in terms of the whole, let's say, process for the organisation of the events, for the preparation of the courses. There are very clear instructions and work that is done to ensure actually that they are complying with all of the necessary regulations. And normally from the forestry services, they are certainly a part, in fact, of the organising committees. You know, we've just been in the National Forest with the FIS World Championships for alpine skiing in Vale Beaver Creek, and the responsible for the forestry service was part of all coordination meetings, was part of all technical inspections, and was present at every step of the way, so that all of the actions that were taken were signed off, as it were. So I am a little bit surprised to hear that.
Well, there was virtually no snow last winter, so...
Last winter, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Bruyninckx, how would you see that?
Yeah, I think it's imperative to move beyond the particularities for the future. I think there are a couple of key questions. First, how does whatever you organize in sports, whether it's a mega event or other stuff, how does it relate to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions? Yeah? There are clear standards for that. Include them in your policies. Yeah? Not in a vague term, but in a concrete term. Secondly, how does this relate to natural capital, biodiversity, forest, whatever natural capital you're dealing with? Include it. There are very good standards for that. Include them in your process. And thirdly, how does this relate to the sustainability of what you are building in its essence? The materials that are used, the recyclability, the design of these things, the after use, all of that. There are great standards for that. So I think you can make this a lot more concrete and a lot more in line with the sort of, I would say, macro societal direction that we will have to take over the next decades, or we will not be talking about the greening of venues or of sports events anymore. We will be dealing with a completely different set of circumstances and talking about very different things than that. So it's much more fundamental than the idiosyncrasies of event here or there, or cutting 12 trees here or there. It's much more fundamental than that.
Okay, last two questions on the back, right there, and then you. Yeah.
Hello, Jonas Burkheim, Sportcast Consultancy for Sustainability, Humanity and Human Rights in Sport. I was very interested to hear all the comments on different aspects of sustainability, and was quite impressed by a number of them. One question that I find has not been addressed very much is more the social sustainability of sporting events. And the question that would relate to that, maybe to Ms. Lewis, would be in how far the human rights aspects from the Agenda 2020, which are not very strong in there, are going to be implemented, and what the plans are on that, to concretize and to implement them in sporting activities, maybe as an example in your federation.
Mr. Lewis.
As far as the detail, I'm sorry, but I'm not really informed to a great extent, other than the fact that the social aspect is very much on the agenda of the IOC Sustainability Department in any case. It's for sure part of the discussions. It's not only related to the environment, but it's also the people side of sustainability as well. Not from a human rights aspect, but from a point of view of the effect of major events and of sport in general, and introducing them to and using it as a catalyst for the involvement of the community. We've seen extremely positive outcomes in the whole concept of volunteering, and of the involvement of the community in major events. Speaking from a FIS standpoint, where we've got events that are taking place, some of them in relatively remote mountain destinations, it becomes the most important element of what's going on in their society. So there's a big emphasis on trying to involve the whole community within what they're actually doing, and to use the major event to play a great role in that social sustainability of what they're doing. An example that I can give you is the FIS Nordic World Ski Championships in Val di Fiemme, that for sure the Norwegians in this room will know very well, because I think it's one of the best known destinations for Norwegians, because they always win lots of medals there. But in any case, what they did was they used the championships to involve the whole community in very much the entire experience. So it was far more persons than they actually needed to run the event as volunteers and as workforce and so on. But it had such a positive impact on the persons there. The organising committee, they organised English lessons within the valley, so that they were also contributing very much to their social existence. And it's very much an ongoing process. They're having regular gatherings, regular get-togethers. So from the sort of the basis of this 2-week championship, they've created really a whole community around it that have been brought together through the championships and had a very positive effect. So I don't know if that's a sort of a type of example that you're talking about, but we've realised and recognised what a great role that it can play about this bringing the community together.
Up to you.
I'm Niels Zurawski from the University of Hamburg, and I have a question to the whole panel. As a social anthropologist, I'm also very interested in rituals, and as an academic, I love discussions. And I wonder whether this discussion is more than a mere ritual, and I wonder what the four of you will take home, any of you, although there's a bit of bias 2 against 2 if we look at it, but if from this room full of critical lefty loonies, whatever, what will you take home, and will it make an impact? Then this session was worthwhile sitting here for 2 hours.
Mr. Bruyninckx, what do you take home, except for a present?
Oh, I get a present?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. If I would have known.
Sustainable.
That I think that the emphasis is too much on the big events and on the professional side of sports, and that I think, because we have not discussed the broader scope, and that I think that the social sustainability and the environmental sustainability aspects are probably much more relevant and important for the non-professional and the non-competitive side, which involves probably 95 to 98% of most of the people, and we will all have to deal with these issues.
Mr. Safarov.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. From, as my understanding, what I will take from this conference, am I right?
Mm-hmm. This session, right?
This session.
I think we have, personally me and the operation committee and maybe the country must do a lot to confirm what the country is doing, and because as my understanding, there are very less information about my country. This is what I took from this session.
Mr. Lewis?
Well, it was a very, very enlightening and interesting to hear both presentations on either side of the table. I've already heard the one about the European Games a couple of times, and there were some very important takeaways that we need to reflect and consider on, both within the federation that I work for, as well as in the greater Olympic movement. And the environment for the Winter Games is a very, very important element, and there are a lot of measures that we should be looking at very carefully. Our work that we're doing together with different agencies, and taking some concrete steps, and how we can also be trying to contribute to solutions with the profile that we have within major sports events. But afterwards I'm going to tell you about Bring Children to the Snow, which is about the other 95%, which is an important element of what we do.
Mr. Zimbalist, what's an economist taking home?
Money. We take home money all the time. No, what I'm taking home is that I think that the International Ski Federation is very fortunate to have as its Secretary General Sarah Lewis, and that the European Environment Agency is very fortunate to have Hans as its executive director.
We are. I have a last question for the gentleman over there, and then we're finishing.
With a sense of irony.
Please state your name.
Rasim Azol from Azerbaijan. I have a simple question for Mr. Safarov. Two questions actually. The first question is how many volunteers we involved actually for European Games, and second question is that I analyzed that they got actually certificates, international volunteers. I mean, they got trainings, seminars, anything. And did you pay something for that actually, any salary for volunteers? And if not, it was able to pay it. Thank you.
Mr. Safarov?
Yep, thank you for the question. As I told in my speech, that 12,500 volunteers was involved. What I mean, they involved, registered more than 12,500. 4,000 of them was involved in the opening and closing ceremony, and others was for the events. We didn't pay any salary, but we reimbursed their transportation and the food. We reimbursed the volunteers' transportation and food fees.
I think we're going to leave it with that, okay? And as a fellow left loony, I really much enjoyed the debate that we had today. I know the debate is going to continue at 8, I think. Jens, you have any remarks to make besides? Yeah? Okay, Jens is going to make any remarks. I hope to see you back at 8, and can I have please a big hand for all the panelists.
I would also like, actually, the reason why I wanted to add my thanks also to the panel and to say that we have tough discussions, I know, and we are surely going to continuing them. I don't know if I'm which kind of loony I am, whether it's to the right or to the left. But I understand very well that it can be, when we have such tough debates, a certain impatience, and why don't we just easily accept that the other part is right, because we, of course, every one of us come with the belief that we know at least just a little bit better. But I would say the idea here is not necessarily that we reconcile viewpoints that cannot easily be reconciled in 2 minutes if they are based on contradictions that have built that are linked to very, very different interests of finances or power or history. The idea with such a dialogue that we have and try to establish at Play the Game is that we have a dialogue instead of not having a dialogue, because the outset is that there is no dialogue. I'm not saying that all experiences at all Play the Game conference at any time then has that it is very helpful to have this dialogue, but I just think in the long run we cannot live without it. So we give it a try, go as far as we can, and I think we are all committed. And therefore, since Play the Game is known as a place for leftist loonies, we thank all kinds of loonies for coming. We are all loonies in our own worlds, and especially those who run risks by coming here of having damaged their reputation or wasting their time on these leftist loonies. I think they also deserve some recognition. At least we have to have two to tango, and there will be more dancing later in the evening. Now it's time for dinner. Thank you.